everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome to another episode of Adoreum Conversations. My name is Katie Barker and I am Business Development Director at Adoreum. Adoreum is a one world network and an international members club for business leaders, entrepreneurs, investors and philanthropists that believe in the power of personal relationships and the collective ability to influence for good. We're really passionate about making a positive difference in this world, somewhat disintermediated perhaps. And I hope now more than ever, amidst the global coronavirus pandemic, we are able to truly appreciate the value of human connection and collaboration. I am so thrilled to welcome the wonderful Debbie Frank today to join us for this episode. Debbie is a great friend of mine, inspirational teacher, global best-selling author, and enlightened astrologer. So thank you, Debbie, for taking this time to join me for a conversation today, to share your wisdom with our community, and hopefully sort of unpack a bit of the magic that we can take from what's the interpretation of what's written in the stars. So welcome, how are you? Where are you recording from today?
Katie. Well, I'm at home, of course, staying at home. And that's really not unusual for me. I do a huge amount of my work in this environment. And because I've got clients all over the world, I'm often on Zoom or Skype with them. So it feels entirely comfortable for me to be here. And it's great to be on. I'm very impressed with what Adoreum are doing. I think it's fantastic. And it's all about sort of finding your team and your tribe, isn't it? And that's really what astrology is about in many ways. It's sort of often when we can actually take a look at our own birth charts, we can see, well, what kind of team and tribe really resonate with us? You know, what kind of frequency are we on? And I think it's fantastic that it's so positive in terms of getting business together to sort of look at making this difference in the world. And that's definitely, I mean, we've been talking about the age of Aquarius for a long time because it's very imprecise exactly when that starts, but we're sort of on the cusp of it. So I think what you're doing is totally just where it's at right now.
Yeah, excellent. It'll be really helpful for people that don't know exactly who you are, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, maybe explaining a bit about how you found your way into astrology back in the 80s and sort of what role it plays in your life before we move into more of the detailed conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, do you know, believe it or not, we were taught astronomy, which is what astrology is really based on. That's the science part at school. So at school, I had lessons where I'd be drawing the constellations and, you know, the movements of the planets. And I think that's what first got me interested. So that was very many years ago. But in those days, it seemed that, you know, astrology was something that only happened in the States in terms of learning it. So like every teenager back then, I was fascinated by Linda Goodman's Sun Signs book. And when I started to first read that, I just became passionate about it. And I realized that it really fitted people. This is just sun sign astrology. And then in my 20s, I got the opportunity to learn quite by accident. I sort of came across this class and I went along with some trepidation, sort of expecting it to be a witch's coven, which of course it wasn't. They're perfectly normal people. And so I've never stopped learning. That's the crazy thing. I'm still studying, I'm still learning, but these days I'm teaching as well. So there are many, many different ways of using your astrology. I mean, we can help businesses. You know, there are astrologers that specialize, for instance, in financial astrology, plotting the markets. And I do quite a lot of just personal astrology with my clients. And also I've been a very big media astrologer. So I've had lots of columns and written lots of books, and I'm just writing my next one for Hay House, which is going to come out next year, 2021. So yeah, pretty busy, but it's fascinating because you just get to work with such amazing people and really, in my way, make a difference to their lives.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. Do you know when the first horoscope was discovered and sort of the story behind
Well,
it?
yes, it's very ancient. It goes back to, the 2nd century BC. There were some cuneiform tablets discovered with about 700 celestial sort of oracles on them, which, had to be decoded. But I think ancient Egypt, they were using it to plant their crops because they knew if they sort of looked at the moon and the moon phases, they could tell when the Nile was going to flood. So, that was fantastic for planting. But I mean, in ancient times, really, only the rulers of the countries got their charts done. It wasn't really for ordinary people. It was thought then that, the ruler's chart would then affect everybody in the kingdom. And gradually, things began to spread across Europe. It went across the Silk Route. It was, amazingly popular. In fact, in Shakespeare's day, everybody would be taught astrology. So your education, you weren't considered to be an educated person unless you had been well versed in astrology as well as science and the arts. So it was very much thought to be a scholarly subject at that time. And then, of course, came, the age of industrial revolution, and science really split then and started dismissing astrology, and there was a huge separation. But I'm so thrilled to see that it seems to be coming back together again now, because with these amazing neuroscientists that we're hearing about doing this research into things like the science of kindness, the science of compassion, they're looking at emotions and how this resonates with the body, and we're looking at things like the quantum field. So those kinds of scientists are able to kind of explore the mystery of life, and I think that's what astrology is, kind of part mystery and part science. So we're sort of trying to marry those two things together. And I think it's really interesting that we're kind of putting so much more credence now on this idea of frequency, resonance, and vibration, because that's really what astrology is. I think the big problem is that people imagine that astrology is, your whole life is fated and you don't have any free will, and how can those objects a million miles away affect us, So, of course, from that perspective, it does seem a bit strange. But I mean, once you actually study the subject and you have an open mind, you can see that actually the planets themselves don't cause things to happen, but it's like a mirror, it's like a symbolism. So as above, so below, which actually even the ancient Babylonians knew. We're just coming around to going, oh yeah, okay, there is something in that, that we're all in this quantum soup, in this field, if you like. And so the planets are kind of reflecting how we're feeling and what our processes are. And if you really study it, you can see that working.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely some conversation to be had in a bit about the resurgence and the interest from the millennial and Gen Z in astrology. But before we do that, I'd be really interested for you to explain sort of, you mentioned charts, and obviously I do know what that means, but it'd be great if you could just, for those that don't, explain a bit about the chart, the sun, moon, rising suns, why we put emphasis on those, and sort of a little bit of the basics.
Yes, well, absolutely. Well, of course, sun sign astrology, which is your horoscope column in the media, only focuses on your sun sign, and everyone knows their sun sign. But when you have your whole chart drawn up, which is based on the time that you were born and the place that you were born, that's all factored in and calculated to your exact location and timing. And then you can see the position of all of the celestial bodies. So you can have a look at all of the 10 celestial bodies we look at, from the sun through to Pluto, or you can look at the asteroids, you can look at the fixed stars. I mean, there's a whole lot of things you could look at. And you start to build up this really complex picture, these layers, which of course people are. It's not just sun sign astrology. You start to see the contradictions that are inherent in that person, and also the patterns that they have. And I always say that, astrology is just like this psychological x-ray, so that, super quickly you can get to something which would otherwise maybe take decades of therapy to unravel, because you can just see it. It goes straight into that person. And you can read what's happening, and where particular patterns come from and what they're all about, and you can actually get in very deep very quickly. So I find that really fascinating and very helpful, obviously.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. How do you, obviously we can't ignore it, how do you feel about the current climate, the astrology of COVID? Are there any known sort of visible cycles of pandemic, lockdown? I'm
Mm.
sure a lot of people will be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, it is very interesting. In fact, I was looking at January 2020 for many years before and telling people even 2016, January 2020, there's going to be something that happens that sort of generates a tremendous amount of worldwide fear. So we can pinpoint the feeling of it, that it's very global, and it feels very threatening, and it challenges the whole sort of order of how we live our lives, including, sort of governments and, the whole establishment and how everyone's going to respond and affect everybody. So you were kind of thinking, well, what kind of things could come into play? Is it a world war that affects everyone? Is it a virus? But actually, when you do look back, viruses, pandemics, the bubonic plague, they all have a certain astrological signature about them. And this is repeated in what happened in January 2020. And it's still kind of around. Obviously, we're still in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is very, very interesting that, the AIDS pandemic had this, AIDS virus had this signature as well, the Spanish flu. The last time we had was the Saturn Pluto configuration. Saturn Pluto were joined and they were opposing each other in 9/11, 2001. So I think that was the last time that we really felt this sense of fear, and I would call it like a loss of innocence. It's like our little bubbles have been pricked, our balloons have burst, and it's sort of like, my goodness, life can change very quickly. Things can sweep into our lives and have a massive effect. So that's what we're looking at, and it's really about, how do we respond to that? What do we do with this fear? Are we going to buy into the fear? Are we going to actually look inside ourselves and use this time to think about, who do we want to be when we come out of this? How do we want to live? What matters to us? So it is an incredible punctuation mark, really, globally. And hopefully, in the end, will be very positive.
Yeah, so it's something to do with Saturn and Pluto. Really
Yes.
interesting. And has there been, there may not have been, but post 9/11 or other, bubonic plague, where you saw these sort of similar constellations or sort of
well, we've had the SARS epidemic. And there's a sort of Jupiter Saturn. Jupiter is a bit of a super spread, and we had Jupiter in the mix. There was a massive lineup in January 2020. There was an eclipse, there was the Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto all sort of lined up there, and Chiron as well. I mean, it was very, very super intense. So it's not surprising that this was really big and affected everybody. But actually, on the date of that, it was kind of around Megxit, the Megxit debacle, and everybody was kind of quite distracted and sort of thinking, oh, is this it? Are they going to be the ones that sort of challenge? But this is really just, us, isn't it, in the UK and the US? I mean, it doesn't really matter to people right across the world. But, it quickly became apparent that no, this was a very, very serious epidemic, pandemic. And with Jupiter, the super spreader, it was going to affect everybody.
Interesting. You alluded to it earlier, but there is, like, undoubtedly still a huge sort of amount of confrontation and skepticism towards astrology, probably because it's both a science and an art. It's creative, isn't it? It's how you interpret things. What are your sort of opinions behind the reasons for this, and sort of how do you manage it when it's directed at you personally?
Yes, well, over the years, obviously, I've become very well versed in how to respond, because sometimes it does feel like an attack, but I try never to take it personally, because usually the person that is so dismissive and maybe contemptuous of astrology, I mean, it is actually like an attack coming at you. How can you possibly believe in such nonsense? It's the arrogance of that attitude is quite breathtaking, really, because usually, of course not, they have not studied it, they've never even had their chart done, and they're coming from a very sort of limited perspective. If it's coming from, this is that end of science where, science is the only reality. Well, if we believe that, then that really is a kind of scientific totalitarian state of mind where no mystery is ever allowed. I mean, nothing is ever going to be validated if it's creative or if it sort of comes from the void space. So, I say to those people, I always keep my sense of humor. I ask them if they believe in love, and they go, well, yes, of course I do. I go, well, you can't prove love. How can you possibly believe in it? And then I just move on as quickly, because I've learned that it's really exhausting trying to argue with those kinds of people if they are so hooked into that mindset of duality. And it's much preferable to me to talk to people who have an open mind. So I've learned not to engage too much with it.
Absolutely. I don't know if you agree, but perhaps that's also coming from a place of fear.
I absolutely agree with that.
How we're in a fearful climate now. But perhaps it's the fear of the unknown, or the fear of not knowing for sure with our version of knowledge knowing, whereas, there are so many other types of knowing, aren't there?
There are. Just emotional intelligence as opposed to intellectual intelligence. And the kind of amusing thing is that perhaps, the skeptics and the believers are actually coming from the same place. The believers are coming from the fear that maybe there isn't any meaning in the world, and the skeptics are coming from the place that there might be, then that's terrifying.
We meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Really interesting. In terms of what individuals can learn from sort of the appreciation and the study of astrology, obviously there's a huge amount to be said for personality types, as well as looking at your personal charts and seeing perhaps things that are coming up, or points of interest or patterns. And in the same way, there must be something, or maybe there isn't, you might know more than me, but around what businesses as sort of beings can take from their astrology around when the time they were created or born.
Absolutely, it's fascinating. And a lot of people do want to have their company launched on an auspicious date, in the same way that you may want to be married on an auspicious date. So it is good if you can to choose a date which has got, plenty of upside to it. And also in terms of businesses, I have spent times working with teams of people that work together, because I think when we sort of really take away some of the layers of the chart, we're really looking at things, big words like purpose. And you want to be employing people and associated with people who share the same sense of purpose and vision. And you can see that very clearly in the chart. So I think, if you can take a look at people's charts, it should definitely be part of the recruitment process. People do Myers-Briggs, but it kind of also gives us an extra piece of insight into how people operate, how they function, how they take in information. We all have very different perceptions of, what our values are, our priorities are, how we might work. Some people are highly intuitive, other people more practical. You want to have that balance and mix, but most importantly, you want to be able to have that shared sense of purpose.
Absolutely, and building a team with the right skills from all angles is an interesting and very effective way to run your business purposefully. So on that note, is there a particular sign associated, or that you see most commonly in entrepreneurs and business leaders? A lot of our community are in that.
Yes, and well, of course, if we're going back to sun signs, we're only getting part of the picture. But obviously the fire signs, which are Aries, Leo, mainly Sagittarius also have a vision, are the kind of go-getters, and they're the kind of startup people. And they have a lot of energy, but they get a little bored with the details. So they prefer to delegate that to the earth signs. So we're looking at Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. Traditionally, Capricorn is the business person. And you also need to have someone who is comfortable in a corporate. Some people are not comfortable in that environment. And some people, don't want to have that public profile. So that the chart will show you, are they good as a front person? Are they good team player? And can they deal with large groups of people? Other people really are better off of just kind of being creatives and sole traders, that kind of thing, or one-to-one. They're more, one-to-one relationship oriented. So all of that needs to happen. But ideally, you need a mix. But also you need, I think, in this day and age as well, that kind of humanitarian sense, to be a philanthropist, to be someone with some social vision. You need to have a little bit of Aquarius, or that Uranian level of thinking, where you can think outside of your own ego and think about the world and what does the world need.
It's really fascinating. I think also even elaborating a bit maybe on the elements and how different signs fit in the different earth, fire, water. Maybe you could explain a little bit about even the elements, because I think if you don't know anything about astrology, but then you hear a little bit about the element that your sun sign relates to, you feel like you learn a bit more about yourself, or you can perhaps accept why you might deal with certain situations in certain ways, or communicate with people, and some people better than others. I personally had that experience.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the water signs, which are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, they are highly empathic, intuitive. So they kind of feel whether something is the right thing to do. And they can feel frustrating for some of the more sort of linear practical types, because the objective reality isn't actually as meaningful as the subjective reality. But they are brilliant with teams, because of course they know exactly what's needed, how to respond and react. They come from the heart. So all of that is good, but things have to feel right for them. But if you're looking at those practical earth signs, I mean, they need something very solid and secure. I mean, that's what they're after. So they don't like to have, a kind of loose itinerary, or, all of this COVID's driving those types of people crazy, because their routines have been altered such a lot. And they do not do well with that, because they like to know exactly what they're doing on any given day, and, to have a plan. So with all of this uncertainty, with all of this sort of total meltdown that we've been dealing with, I think that's unnerved a lot of the earth signs. But they're brilliant with details, with seeing things through, once they've sort of got everything together again, they're the people that will rebuild everything, And then we've got the air signs, the great communicators, and we're looking at Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, whether you class him as a great communicator, but he certainly thinks he is. And the Geminis, the Libras, the Aquarians, who all have a message. And, these are the people that are great at getting the message of companies out, who keep the information flowing between people. And they're essentially quite logical and quite objective. And last but not least, the fire signs, the Aries, the Leos, the Saggies, who are, very good leaders, but they are people who have this enthusiasm, this total get up and go. So when they want things to happen, their enthusiasm is just infectious. They just have this fire energy that other people can feel the heat. And so they're the ones that really make things happen, and they're brilliant.
So maybe we need a bit of Aries to launch us back into our new normal in this change.
I think so, yes. Well, it's interesting. I think we do. And there is going to be quite a lot of Aries energy coming up later in the year. And a lot of, there's an eclipse coming up, an eclipse full moon in Sagittarius, fire sign energy. And I think, it's about discovering things again with confidence, having confidence, because I think that's what's really taken a knock. Instead of fear of missing out, it's fear of going out, isn't it? It's fear of doing anything. But the fire signs are undiminished, undimmed by that. So yeah, they'll be the leaders and the trailblazers.
Excellent. So going back a bit to the resurgence in interest, what do you think's caused that, particularly with the millennial and Gen Z?
Yes, well, yes. Gen Z even, very fascinated by it already at a very young age. The millennials, well, they had a particular signature in their chart, which was very what we call transpersonal. In other words, they could sort of grasp things that were quite mysterious and other realities in a way. And of course, as they were, sort of coming teenagers into their 20s, iPhone and technology. So therefore, they are really the first generation to be fully immersed in this. And really, it's given them this capacity to move from the material reality of the world to this kind of virtual reality that we see on our screens. And therefore, it's not much of a jump to then kind of have this other mysterious, esoteric reality. So they don't really have a problem with that. They can move between these realms. And I've noticed that they're very much searchers, they're seekers. I mean, I do a lot of work with millennials, actually, because I really get them. And, you know, I think they want to be different, and they are questioning everything and stepping outside of those accepted norms. And the Gen Zs, I mean, they're just kind of born into astrology, you know. It's going to be, you know, something that's taught in schools probably by the time they get to be the teachers. Yeah, interesting.
Excellent. Really interesting. And on that note, I don't know about your social media streams, but I get a lot of retrograde sort of commentary. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit for those people that don't really understand what retrograde means.
Yes, well, retrograde's almost kind of become a meme. I think a lot of people become aware of Mercury retrograde, which happens 3 times a year. And Mercury retrograde is when information and movement gets snarled up, and we're always complaining, you know, that public transport's on the blink, heavy traffic, and things break down. It also seems to be affecting the flow of information in terms of technology, equipment even. So that's a kind of source of irritation. But it's not just about what's going on in the material world, but it's always to do with this pressing the pause button. It's like there's some missing piece of information that needs to come in at this time. So it's a bit like an interruption that's saying, hang on a minute, you need to consider something else. And I've noticed with these retrograde periods, it's an excellent time for retrieving information or for going back over something, having another look at it. People getting back in touch or resorting to plan B is actually not such a bad idea on the Mercury retrograde. And right now, as we speak, we're in the middle of Venus retrograde, which is the relationship planet and the planet of values. And this is also, I think, fascinating, timed as it is with the lockdown, is that, you know, all relationships have been thrown up in the air, whether you are living with your nearest and dearest 24/7, I mean, that's a bit different, or whether you're separated from them. And there's this idea of, you know, well, what do we really value in the world now? Who do we want to be when we come back out? You know, what are the first things that we really want to do? And now that we've been given this kind of, well, it has been a constriction, but actually it's also been like a permission to reconsider the choices in our lives. A lot of people kind of wanting to opt out, you know, not wanting to go back to the water cooler office environment. So Venus retrograde is all about this. It's like, oh my goodness, actually you can shake things up. You can. I think there's going to be a lot of further change. And later in the year, Mars will go retrograde. So this was another thing I was looking at before this year began, about all the retrogrades. And generally it's a time of reconsidering everything. So
what does it mean in terms of the actual planets when a planet is in retrograde?
The astronomy of it.
Going backwards, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's actually an optical illusion. It's just, it's like when you're in a train, if you've ever sat in a train and the train next to you has started moving and you think you're moving. It's sort of like, it's like a sort of sleight of hand, you know. So it's an optical illusion, but it carries on this optical illusion for a period of days. The Venus retrograde is just over 40 days, and we're coming up to the middle of that now. Sorry?
Is that because it slows down? Or?
Yeah, well, yes, it does. The movement of it as appearing from here on Earth, it appears to slow down and goes backwards. So there's this feeling of going back over old ground. I mean, it's symbolic, don't forget, it's this symbolism. Yeah. We're going back over old ground. We're reconnecting with something we've lost touch with. And often things from the unconscious come up and become conscious. So actually it's and you know, Venus retrograde is very interesting as far back as ancient Mayan times. You know, they would actually time sending in their troops for war on the day that Venus turned direct again after a retrograde. retrograde because it has more power. So, you know, it's always been something that's been of note through the ages of astrology, very, very powerful. And I think we're in this incredible time of transition, both globally, but personally on an individual level. And there are a lot of transitions being made psychologically that will translate into how we live our lives.
Yeah, I agree with you. So for people that are interested but don't perhaps know where to begin, how can people start to learn and get into astrology? Are there any tips from you or good resources that you would point them in the direction of? I mean, I personally loved your book, Written in the Stars.
Oh, thank you, Katie.
I love the relationship. There was a chapter on how the different signs are in relationship with one another, which is really light-hearted, and I loved that, for example. And it's a really easy read to get into astrology.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to get some of this information is very deep and can be a bit heavy almost to assimilate. So I think it's really important to keep a sense of humor. And it's that kind of wry smile when you recognize yourself, isn't it? So my next book is going to be about all of the planets, the positions of all the planets, so people will be able to look at their entire chart. And I have actually got a whole online course called Enlightened Astrology, which people can have streamed online. So that teaches you literally everything you need to know how to read a chart, and that's available from learningstrategies.com/Debbie Frank. So that will take you straight through to the page. But I think that, you know, the thing is to read as much as possible, get your chart. And it's a process, you know, we're always learning. And if you start to look at other people's charts, that's when you really learn, because people are their charts, they're walking around, that's how it works, that's what they're living out. And if you start to do a chart for someone else, you'll get to see.
Love it. Thank you so much. I wonder if there's anything that has particularly resonated with you from your long and ongoing career that is interesting and worth sharing, or I don't know, drawing attention to, like any specific case study or something fun that you worked on that you might have anything to share on.
Well, I work with all sorts of people. I've had some very funny experiences, I can tell you, but I can't. Because it's confidential. But honestly, the things that are unearthed are hilarious sometimes. Extraordinary. I mean, that's what keeps me so fascinated, is that the way people are with their life stories, really. And, you know, I think it's really interesting how after people have had their chart done, you know, sometimes they get in touch and they sort of say, you know, no one's really been able to understand me in that way, and I couldn't really understand myself, and now I do, I can accept it and I can move on. And especially for relationships, you know, you can sort of put two people's charts together, and I think people can really see then in a very graphic way, literally it's a visual graphic of what went wrong or what's going right. So there are, you know, I've worked with all sorts of people, from my famous clients in Princess Diana, various royalty CEOs, and you know, anybody who wants to have their chart done, I'm very happy to work with them. And you know, I just think that it is a fantastic tool, and I feel privileged really to work with people because they've allowed me into their lives and we've shared something, you know. And I think when you share that level of connection, it's just fantastic, well, for both of you.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a very fulfilling job. I'm sure if you're a meaning and feeling person.
Yeah, well, I am 7 planets in water. What can I tell you?
I wonder if we might be able to ask a couple of questions from our members.
Yeah, sure.
Adoreum Club Network. One of our members has asked, what is the significance of the Saturn return? How can we prepare for it or make the most of it, if at all? So yeah, maybe
good question. Well, that's something, if we live to be 29-30, which hopefully we do, and again 59-60, and then again 89-90, every 29 years Saturn comes and makes a return. It comes around. Now the return is, when we say to somebody on their birthday, many happy returns, the reason for that is because the sun has come back to where it was when you were born. It's your birthday where the sun is. But the Saturn return is when Saturn comes back to where it was when you were born. And it is a real time of recalibration. So you often find people at 29 to 30 are, taking on a big responsibility or making a big choice for their adult lives. So they might be setting up a business, they might be getting married, having a baby, doing something which feels like a commitment. And if they've already made commitments, they're often questioning those because they were made in their 20s, and they're now feeling that actually they're not sure they really are the kinds of choices that would last them through their adult life. So you're really choosing almost for the next 30 years. I mean, obviously we have a lot of leeway within that, but you're sort of setting out then on this middle years of your adult life. And then again, the second Saturn return, 59 to 60, is when you're kind of letting go of all of that. You've had that great middle period of setting things up, and then you're actually just letting it go and thinking more about, okay, what's my legacy, what really matters to me, and what have I learned in my life, and how can I give that back in a way to the world. So that's another very big transitional point.
So in terms of preparing for it or making the most of it, if at all, I guess the first stage is awareness. So
yeah. Awareness is everything, as they say. And being ready to kind of step up to the plate, because often you're asked to do something that's quite concrete at that time. There's a test. Saturn is the planet of karma. So, it's like, well, are you ready to really be a grown-up, no matter whether you're 29 or 59, and do something here that is a very strong decision that must be followed through.
Absolutely. And I think it would be interesting to look back over the previous few hundred years, because I think now perhaps the 59 Saturn return is even more poignant, because we're likely to, hopefully, all being well, live for that longer time, whereas before it was sort of perhaps more focused around the 29, 30.
Yes. Well, the 59-60 is like, kind of pre-retirement now, but it's kind of like, okay, now what do I want to do? I mean, I've been setting things up, but what is my new sense of purpose? Yeah. So there's a different engagement with the world. It's often sort of offloading a lot of obligations that you've taken on, just freeing yourself and sort of really getting more into that spiritual side of life.
Yeah. So another question. Can you elaborate on moon and ascendant signs as factors in personality in addition to your sun sign? So I suppose, what do each of those mean when you're reading a chart, and why is it important?
Yes, well, it's perfectly possible to give a really intense reading of someone just with those three things: the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. Those three things are enormously important. So the moon is your emotional antennae, really, and your comfort zone. It's what you need in order to feel at home. And we all kind of look for security in different ways. So it will tell you something very specific. Like if you have moon in Aquarius, it's very much about seeking security through friendship and through other people. If you have the moon in Cancer, you really do want home and family. That's the sort of bedrock. So, to know where your moon sign is to know kind of where you get your nourishment, where you get your emotional food in a way. But also it's really important to know your moon sign, because if you're going to live with someone, then you're going to be living with their moon sign. And if your moon signs aren't compatible at what they're like at home, they could be someone completely different in the outside world. You get them home, and that's when you really get to see whether you're compatible on that moon sign level. And the moon tells you a lot about your early years, your sort of emotional patterns. It even describes the mother, your own mother, obviously, because that's the first relationship we have, and what kind of intimacy we're capable of, and how much we really want in our lives. And then if we look at the ascendant, which is really formed by the exact moment of your first breath, the sign that was rising on the east at the time you were born. Well, that is how you go into anything that's new. So it's anytime you walk into a room for the first time, you activate the ascendant, a room full of new people, or start a new job, or go out in the day. you are meeting people through that persona of the ascendant. So it's not the real you. It's a bit like, you know, the clothes you wear as a sort of defense stroke persona, but you engage with the world in that way. So that's very important. And, you know, people's ascendant, it often is quite interesting because people will say to me, okay, guess what sign I am. And I say, well, the more you know, the less likely you are to be able to guess, because I might be seeing your ascendant, which is how you look. And you'll be going, no, actually, I'm a sun sign Gemini, and you said I was a Leo. But actually, it turns out, you know, they're Leo hair, the lion's mane. When you do their chart, yes, they're Leo rising. So, yeah, it's how you look and how you engage with others, basically.
And the fun of it all is in the interpretation, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, it is fun. It's, you know, it's deep and it's fun. What more could you want? I mean, it sort of covers the gamut of everything. You can go as deep as you like, or you can be as superficial as you like. And the whole study of it is like that. I often compare it to, like, do you want a McDonald's, which is your sun sign, or do you want the full Michelin star experience, which is, you know, the whole gourmet thing of your chart with every single nuance and you know, in every taste. So it is a very nuanced subject. There's so much to it, and that's why clients come back, you know, time and time again. And, you know, I work with them for decades, some of them, because you connect on such a level, and there's always more to discover, more to talk about. It's a great sort of reference point.
Totally. So what's next for you? Obviously, you're writing another book. That's very exciting.
Yes, well, I'm really full on with writing the book. I'm on quite a tight deadline, and it's exciting to do this book. I've always got lots of projects up my sleeve that I'm working on. I'm working on a TV show. I'm working on an app. I've got clients all the time. So I'm very busy doing things, which is fantastic. So certainly had a very highly engaged lockdown, really.
Yeah. Us too, actually. I feel like it's been not only a time to pause and reflect, but also a time of productivity, perhaps the ascendant in all of us of how we react in this moment is drawing us to be more creative.
How we're going to come out of it. I think it's very creative. It's like an enforced sense of being still, and for many people they've just never had that opportunity, and I think there's a lot of sort of railing against it to start with, and once you relax into it, you kind of surrender into it, and you start to make friends with that side of yourself that isn't on supercharge all the time. And that's when, you know, you get to really know what's going to be important for you in the next phase of your life. So I mean, I think there's going to be some huge decisions coming out of this.
Me too. Oh, it's so exciting. I can't wait to see you again when the climate.
I know. And that's the bit I really miss, is actually physically seeing people. Yeah.
Me too. I think, as I said at the beginning, I think hopefully this time apart and on lockdown will help people to even more fully appreciate the power of human connection in a physical sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like that enforced separation to make you appreciate the specialness of the simplicity of just being in the same space as another person.
Yeah, and the power of community and shared experience.
Yeah.
For the positivity and impact moving forward. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
So good to have you.
It's such fun to be on. Great to speak with you, as always. Love it. Thank you.
Take care.
And see you.